Hey friends, welcome back to the Advocate podcast, where stories spark change and truth finds its voice. Today's guest is someone whose courage and advocacy have reshaped how we talk about HIV and the law. Robert Suttle is not just a powerful voice in the movement to end HIV criminalisation, he's lived the injustice, survived it, and turned it into fuel for change. In this episode, we go deep into stigma, resilience, and what it truly means to fight back with dignity. This is one of those conversations you need to hear. Let's get into it. Robert, thank you so much for coming onto the show. It really is a pleasure to have you here and to have you with us. You have a fascinating story and one that I'm very excited to learn myself, but also that I'm really excited for our listeners and the people watching this to hear about. So I think my first question would be, tell me a little bit about yourself and your personal journey, within the HIV community.
Yes, thank you, Christian, for having me on. It's a really good pleasure to speak to you and as well as to your audience and to just have an opportunity to share a little bit about myself. I am Robert Suttle. I am a person living with HIV for 21 years this year, and time flies. And
Yeah.
so I would not have imagined the journey that I have. Looking at from the beginning of when I learned that I was diagnosed. I am originally from Louisiana, which is a state in the United States of America, and it's in the South. And one thing that I did not know growing up is that living in the South and being a Black young man growing up and then learning about my sexuality in terms of identifying as gay, uh, that I was living in the environment where HIV was so prevalent here in the United States. At the time when HIV, the epidemic happened, I was a baby. I was like 1 year, 2 years old actually at the time, and so I wasn't aware. Even in my teenage years, I wasn't as aware as I am now, of course, of that I was living in that type of environment where we have the prevalence of the HIV epidemic, and then also another phenomenon around mass incarceration and how that impacted the Black community. And so for me, it was just like this. This is like the perfect storm of two crises colliding at the same time, and so. Um, and I say this because it is what has propelled me into advocacy, in my diagnosis, as well as this issue around HIV intersecting with the mass incarceration here in the United States. And so that is some of what makes me who I am because of where I come from, my lived experience as a Black man growing up in the South, which is very conservative. Uh, and with the identities that I carry, the multiple marginalized identities that I carry, I was not um, as aware as I should have been or prepared to be able to live out my life. Again, without knowing the attitudes and behaviors that people have towards folks that are Black, that are queer, living with HIV, and as a result, also someone who is have experience from being formerly incarcerated. So these these experiences in my life have really are what have shaped me and have informed my advocacy and drives my advocacy because I recognize that with these identities there are injustices that still exist even now in 2025. So here in the 21st century.
And so tell me, there's a few sort of points that I really want to cover, but tell me a little bit about what the work that you do today. I think that's really
Mhm.
important.
I currently work as an independent consultant. I did co-found an organization a little over a decade ago called the Zero Project, which was a way for me to address HIV criminalization here in the US, and also to use my voice as someone that was impacted by HIV criminalization here in the US. And so through that organization, I was able to learn a lot about advocacy. I had never done any type of advocacy before.
Mhm.
So it was really a way for me to practice and me to learn skills. And so now, working as an independent consultant, I'm able to use those skills to work with all various organizations, from HIV advocacy organizations to LGBTQ oriented advocacy organizations. And so, and even beyond that, just a lot of different community groups, and collaborating with other individuals. And so with that work, I bring awareness. I also work with a lot of students who are interested in HIV criminalization. So that makes me glad to know that I'm able to utilize some of the skills um, that I have to be able to support students who are interested in advocacy. And also, along the way, I was able to obtain a master's in student affairs and higher education. My undergrad degree was in business administration and management, and so just been able to manage my own business, as well as use some of my skills in advocacy to support students um, and help them along their advocacy journey in whatever fields that they're coming out of, whether it's public health or any other field.
So again, and I said this in the very beginning, I find this story fascinating. So you just the work that you've done there, the organizations that you've been a part of, to co-found, but also the work that you've been able to do and to get your master's degree and stuff. Um,
Hmm.
I think it's really important that people recognize that in 2009 you were actually convicted under in Louisiana under HIV
Hmm.
criminalization laws, and you've still been able to do all of this.
Hmm.
Can you sort of take me back, like how how in your own words, sort of how did all of that happen? Like what was sort of the I don't I suppose the catalyst really for that, and then I'm really that piece of that journey is just incredible for me.
Yeah, and I imagine it is. I would say that prior to my diagnosis, I've always been someone that was actively involved, whether it's in my church or when I was in college. I was involved in student leadership, um, so student organization councils and different things like that. So I always lived sort of an active life in terms of organizing, um, and just sort of staying busy, right? Doing things to achieve something. I was always been that way, even as a little kid. I was always reading or doing something to try to achieve something. And so, um, little did I know that some of those skills would carry me through one of the most difficult times of my life. And so my advocacy, as I like to say, doesn't necessarily start with me co-founding an organization or even my diagnosis. Although I was in college when I learned about my diagnosis, 2 years of 2 months shy of graduating in undergrad, and so. Um, I've just always been that person that always found a way to push forward, to persevere, no matter what the situation was. However, with this criminalization experience, I really felt that this was it. I mean, you kind of look back at experiences in your life and you're like, oh, yeah, I've overcome that because you thought those things were hard. And then you realize, like, wow, I got through that. But for some reason, I felt like this thing was it. Like, I don't know how I'm going to like overcome this experience, because what it means to be someone who is formerly incarcerated or have a felony record here in the United States, it's really hard. It's really hard to move forward, um, if versus being someone that didn't have those barriers. And so, but what it required is that you be extra creative, like extra creative, and being a black man also means that I had to work twice as hard, 3 times as hard. But now with the felony record, it just makes it even harder. But because of my experience, I realized that what happened to me in terms of the criminalization, the prosecution, was bigger than me and the person that pressed charges against me. That the issue of HIV criminalization was so much bigger than what I was experiencing, and so that is what inspired me to learn more about how did I get here? Like,
Mhm.
how did this happen? And that's where I had to learn how HIV again was so prevalent, how it was being seen, how it's being viewed, how people living with HIV were being viewed. Um, so there's a narrative that's already out there, you know, that we're dangerous people and are dirty people and dishonest people. And I knew that those things were not me. Um, and so that was part of the reason why I spoke out, as well as when you're facing criminalization, it just takes it to a whole nother level because now you're looked at as a dangerous person in the community or in the world. And so, um, it was important for me to speak out. It's like I feel like that was the only choice I had. And I'm glad I did because usually in the situations, they don't expect people like me to speak out. In fact, they work hard to erase us, you know, or to silence us. And it was important for me to speak out because the narrative out there, as I said, was that we're dangerous, we're um, dishonest people, and I already knew that as a Black person that was, you know, even more of a strike. And so it was important that I speak out. And little did I know that uh, I would be co-founding an organization and speaking out across the country and other parts of the world. I never anticipated that. I only wanted to um, counter the narrative that was out there, and by speaking truth to who I am and to who people who identify as like I do, who we are. Um, and I'm realizing that I did make the right decision in doing that because there is so much now effort to continue to erase and silence people who look like me, who identify as I do. And I think that is, again, the lived experience prior to my diagnosis and then going through the diagnosis, going through the prosecution and going through the advocacy. I think these things are what propelled me and helped me to do what I've done over the past decade.
Incredible. It's super incredible. Honestly, I'm a huge advocate myself, and
Hmm.
I really haven't had to, as a white cisgender man, like I've not had to overcome those barriers, and I can tell you that it's not even been easy for me to break in and to to have my voice heard. So, um,
Mm.
kudos to you for overcoming all of those challenges and still coming out on the other side of that. you know, I'd probably say that a better person for it, but also having the, and excuse my French, but having the balls to stand up, and, and to use your voice and amplify your own voice. I think that's just it just it really drives me and inspires me as an individual, and I'm sure it's done
Hmm.
the same for lots of other people as well. I'm really, obviously, I'm based in the UK, and I have a sense of kind of what the HIV criminalisation laws are and how they affect, individuals and people living with HIV, but particularly in terms of like the stigma and things like access to healthcare. Um, I'd really, I'd look for you to sort of give me your take on kind of what the impact of those laws are, from your side of the pond.
Yeah, the way I see it as another way to incarcerate people, uh, particularly Black people, because historically speaking, and if people know anything about our country's history around slavery, how slavery in the U.S. was based around race, and just over the years, there have been different forms of ways to control and surveil and punish people um, through slavery, through Jim Crow laws that really segregated us, the blacks from the whites, um, in certain areas, and across the country, but ever more prevalent in the South, the segregation and like the separate water fountains and the separate places where you eat and gather, that kind of thing. And then we move beyond the civil rights era, where now we are at least considered, looked at as whole people, as Black people who are able to vote because we have a Civil Rights Act. Um, it allowed us to vote, as well as some other things that were implemented, um, which helped again us to be recognized as true citizens in the U.S. And that was in the '60s, again before I was born. However, it didn't cover everything, and it didn't cover me as a gay person. It didn't cover me as in terms of HIV. So all the things that we've been uh, fighting for based on our race now have to fight for the other identities.
Mm,
Um and so when HIV/AIDS happened in those early '80s, there were people who controlled the narrative, people in power that decided that criminalization was going to be the way to address transmission here in the US. And that's coming at the federal level, and then that was made into a provision within a particular act, the Ryan White Care Act. Um, and in that provision, it provided states an incentive that if they want wanted to receive funding to address HIV transmission, they had to create HIV criminalization laws, or HIV specific laws. And so the state where I'm from, Louisiana, was one of the few first states to do that. Um, there was a pushback even then that this was not a good idea, but however,
that is
the leaders, the legislatures, the states across the states decided that they wanted to do this. And so what I said earlier in terms of this being another way to criminalize people, this is it, because at the time in the U.S. we were dealing with the war on drugs and mass incarceration, which also expanded mass incarceration um, here in the U.S. And so if you were to look at a map of the HIV prevalence in the South and lay that on top of that, a map of states with HIV specific laws, HIV criminalization laws, it would be like a perfect fit. And so,
so. Let me get this right. Let me clarify this. These, obviously the Ryan White Fund was set up, to help. This fund was set up to help, people living with HIV, and the HIV
mhm,
community, and the people, serving within the HIV community.
mhm.
But in order for them to receive that funding, they also, as a way of counteracting the rate of prevalence, they had to criminalize. They had to accept that they were going to criminalize things. Otherwise, they didn't get the funding.
Absolutely. I don't know if they wouldn't have gotten, I mean, I guess we can assume that they probably wouldn't have gotten the funding, but most states went with it, right? Because they wanted this funding.
That is
Um,
that is mental.
yeah. And unfortunately, we had media, we had law enforcement agencies that were also, and then some politicians that were really pushing for stronger laws to really, again, control gay people, control people involved in sex work, and obviously Black people. I mean, we're always on, on the table to be controlled and punished. So this was again just as I say, another way to do it. And so criminalization of health status is not anything new.
Mhm.
It's just evolves over time, and in this present time it's HIV. Simply many reasons. One, it's not a curable disease, but it is a chronic manageable disease, um, and one that should be treated with dignity and respect for the people that are impacted by it. And so um, it's just unfortunate that to address transmission, um, this is the way that they choose to address HIV. But really, a lot of these laws are not really based on actual transmission. It's really about exposure. And so the question is, what is exposure? What does that look like? And simply in this day, if you're a person living with HIV and you know that you're living with HIV and you engage in any type of sort of sexual activity or behavior without disclosing or sharing that you're living with HIV, then you can be criminally liable um, for exposing someone, even though there is no transmission
Yeah.
that takes place. And so, and unfortunately, they weren't considering the science. They don't consider whether you're in care. They don't consider whether you have an undetectable viral load, which means that you cannot transmit the virus to another person. They didn't even look at just whether you used a condom, like whether you've taken precautions, or maybe even just looked at perhaps if there is this accusation, then what happened? What happened in this situation? Let's assess the situation. But instead, you are accused, you are arrested, and put in jail, and then you have to go through this whole prosecution experience. And if that goes through, then your case is adjudicated and you sent to prison for however many years. In my case, it was 6 months, um, and at hard labor, and then in certain states they may require you to be on the sex offense registry. And I again was from a state that required that, and so and what I mean by registry means sex offense, being listed as a sex offender. Um, and in my state, they do the community notification, sending out notifications within a certain radius of your community, putting your picture in the paper. Also, the state that I come from, they put sex offender on your driver's license, and so
Wow.
um, so there was just yeah,
So
it's
it's this.
pretty
It's. I mean, it seems so easy to just be able to make this kind of accusation, not acknowledging
mhm,
any of the facts. I mean, the U equals U, undetectable equals untransmissible, is such a
mhm.
profound and
Yeah,
a really life changing message.
it is. It
There is
is.
zero chance of anybody being able to pass
Hmm.
HIV on through unprotected sex with an
Hmm.
undetectable viral load. Like that is life changing, and it's backed by science. So to not even take those things into account and just practically be incarcerated,
Yeah,
it is just, I mean,
yeah.
gosh,
It's
that is
another way to exploit this epidemic in ways that are not healthy for
mm,
any of us. And it invokes fears, plays on people's fears
mm,
versus trying to educate them and inform them of ways to protect themselves and others. And also, it puts this responsibility on the person living with HIV to not only live with it, but to be responsible for protecting themselves and other people, versus it being more of a shared responsibility amongst the community, and also being supported by people who make the decisions about funding and our access to things. But instead, they rather criminalize us and put us on this sort of seesaw, whether we're going to have funding or we're not going to have funding. They're going to cut funding for the things that not only people living with HIV need, but also people who are not living with HIV, and providing them what they need. And so um, that's why I think it's just exploitation at the highest. And there's lots of money to be made around this epidemic. However, there are those of us that are working to end the epidemic. There are those of us that are people living with HIV will continue to live with it. So it's not really ending for us, but it's a matter of us maintaining what we need to live and have a better quality of life, living with the diagnosis and thriving and aging with the diagnosis. And then also, it's an opportunity for people not living with HIV to know what the options that are available to them so that they don't have to contract HIV. So PrEP can be available to them, and there's condoms, of course, and there's just the education, right, around how people who are living with HIV or and undetectable cannot transmit the virus to people. So these are things that folks need to be aware of, so that they're not living in a state of fear, you know, and incarceration.
yeah, I totally agree. And
Hmm.
look, I think it really is a shared responsibility. Like we've all got tools
Hmm.
available
Yes, we have
to
tools now. Yes.
this is it. We've got tools available to us, that whether it's HIV or any another form of sexually transmitted infection. Like
Hmm.
you have the power, you have the tools, you have the access for the most part to be able to protect yourself. It's on you.
Yeah.
It's not on anybody
Whether
else.
Absolutely. Whether someone discloses that to you or not, you still have the ability to get what you need. Um, but you just got to know what's available
Mhm.
to you. Um, and then also you have to be mindful of other sexually transmitted infections, which is a normal thing. um, HIV should be looked at as normal as well, and not as something that's like just this separate thing. But um, however, HIV does need to be given attention because it is so easy to just think that it's over, and that it's easy to just write us off,
Hmm.
or yeah. And so it is important still today.
So I really, you've been advocating, on these issues, for over a decade now, and I'm really interested to see from your perspective maybe how the narrative and the public conversation has changed around HIV criminalisation laws,
Hmm.
and has it evolved?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I first got involved, it was really hard to get people to even say the words HIV criminalization. And I get it now because, I mean, HIV criminalization is not anything new, but for people who have been in HIV community talking about testing and being treated, and, and that by that time talking about um, being virally suppressed, um, that the criminalization was just a new thing. It was new, but um, and so when I came on, it was really hard to get people to address it, and so they were slowly starting to add it in policy briefs. And so I've been fortunate just through doing a lot of education and awareness to be able to just again to open people's minds up to what was happening. And so we saw over time since 2012, although HIV criminalization has been looked at even prior to 2012, but that's when I came in, into advocacy. It has grown tremendously, and now I mean, there's lots of people now that know about it, and we have been in all sorts of spaces to bring this up, and so much that even the president, not our current president, but President Biden and President Obama on their administration were able to mention the words HIV criminalization and also to in my words, condemn it. That's not their words, but in my words, to condemn it, recognizing it around World AIDS Day, uh, those times. And so, and at least Biden did at least twice. And I think under the Obama administration, that it was at least mentioned in the HIV National HIV/AIDS strategy, which was huge. Um, and we've had representatives on the federal level in our federal government to try to introduce a national federal bill that addressed repealing HIV. It didn't get very far, but had been introducing it since 2013, each year under the new Congress. And so there's been a lot of points where um, that there have been some advocacy on a larger scale. We currently have statewide coalitions now that address HIV criminalization across a few states, over a dozen states now. Um, we've even had our Center for Disease Control also do this. Um, it's like uh, I don't want to call it a toolkit, but it's a document that talks about HIV criminalization. And so and for public health, people who work in public health, for them to be able to address HIV criminalization, at least from their lens. And we've had several publications here in the US that have been highlighting HIV criminalization. And so we have our own HIV is Not a Crime. We call it a training academy where people come and learn about the strategies as to how to address HIV criminalization in their state. They go and create, or they go in and um, through the training for 2 or 3 days, and they go back to their states and get in their coalitions and figure out how to, strategize for that year.
Hmm.
And this has been brought up in several colleges, community-based organizations, and so over over the past decade, it has really gotten far. But it's still the issue now is that you have to bring this issue back into the public because many people aren't aware of it. Many people were younger, or they were just not in the space to hear about this. And so we have to constantly continue to educate
Hmm.
everybody, not just legislators at the state, but just the whole community, people at large, about this issue. So yeah, so I like to say every 5 years to 10 decade, you kind of have to do the re-education all over again,
Hmm.
because there are new people that are coming on to this. So
That's
I like to say that the momentum has been great, and I expect that it will continue to be better as people figure out how they can become involved and do their part.
Yeah, for sure. And I think
Mhm.
collectively, for for anybody wanting to advocate, there is some very clear messaging out there, um, that that is that would massively help with a ripple effect of if that can be shared outwardly, and for
Mhm.
anybody listening to this, share this messaging, and and things like this on their own social media channels or within
Mhm.
their friendship and family networks. That goes such a long way towards changing the narrative. um
Yeah, and I would add also for people who are in other parts of the world that if they are curious about this issue, follow the HIV Justice Network. Um, Edwin Bernard is the executive director of the network, as well as HIV Justice Worldwide. And so I look at him as like the godfather of this issue, because he was someone that, and I didn't know at the time, but he was someone that has been following this issue since it landed in his hands.
Mhm.
So being able to connect with a lot of people around the world through his through his advocacy through that organization. So again, if people are curious about it, then I would encourage you to follow HIV Justice Network, and, and see where you can plug in other parts of the world, because this is a phenomenon not just in the U.S. and Canada or Mexico, but it is a phenomenon that happens around the world.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. um super super interesting. I feel like I'm learning so much. I'm learning so much already. I'm loving it.
Hmm.
Um, so
Excellent.
I think that there's a lot going on, especially within the United States right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, you know, Lots of challenges that are having these ripple effects on a global scale, specifically with funding and access, which is fundamentally going to decrease access.
Hmm.
But I'm going to flip that on its head, and I'd like to I'd like to ask you kind of what's giving you hope right now.
Oh, that's a good question, Christian. I'm struggling with it. I'll be very transparent about that, because it is the way that this current action in our country is playing out is hitting us on all fronts all at the same time. And and we're just a couple of months in to this
Mhm.
administration. It hasn't even been a year, hasn't even been 6 months. And we're already feeling something as if like we've been in this for a while. And
Mhm.
so I don't I don't know. I don't I don't know. And that's really, I usually have something, and I can only say the thing that's giving me hope is that, something as my grandmother would say, and many people probably said, right is always going to win.
Mhm.
May not be right now, may not be tomorrow, but at some point it will.
Mhm.
And I just feel like with this being the beginning, and with this administration, and this is how they're rolling out, that we have a long ways before, these 4 years are up. Um, I guess if I had to name something that gives me hope is time, because time is constant, and at some point to change, something has to change. There has to be a shift, right? Uh, Also, I think gives me hope is that our ability to talk about it,
Mhm.
to speak up and not remain silent about it.
Mhm.
Uh, People here in the country, in the U.S., are starting to protest, in large numbers, but there needs to be uh, more outcry. But they're slowly beginning to see what's happening, and so I guess in some way that gives me hope that people aren't just, being naive and thinking that this is normal,
Yeah.
because it's not.
I will. I'll give you my take on what I think. What I think is what's giving me hope right now. So
Hmm.
this is a two-pronged answer, really. So
Hmm.
I think that having almost the foundations of a community to be able to access healthcare and funding and all of the things that we're now suddenly seeing that we no longer got access to, having that the political party side of that as a linchpin, as a point of single point of failure. um,
Hmm.
I think there's many organizations that I've spoken to over the past couple of months who have said that they didn't want to rely upon USAID and PEPFAR and
Yeah.
this stuff.
Right.
Um,
Hmm.
and the second sort of side of this answer is that with that in mind, I've been a part of the HIV community for the past 10 years. 10 years this summer, and I have never met a community that are better at coming together, speaking up, acting up, and fighting back. And
Hmm.
I think that what gives me hope is that there are fighters within this community that are
Yeah.
prepared to stick their neck out, um, and speak up and challenge this narrative that we're almost trying to be force fed. And
Hmm.
I think that collectively and from a collaboration point of view, I think what will come out of the back of this is maybe what many of these organisations had hoped for.
Hmm.
We've had it forced upon us, but I think collectively, we can collaborate and we can actually develop more sustainable a more sustainable ecosystem that isn't dependent upon political whims.
Hmm.
That's what I'm hopeful for, and it's going to be tough. It's going to be really challenging
Yeah.
right now. Um,
Yeah. If we survive, at least for us here in the US, is if we survive, because not only is it just, I mean, it's like I said, it's everything on every front. And so we're not even sure. Yes, we have what we have right now, but how long are we going to have that? How long are we going to be to afford the things that we have to pay for if, if it's high, or are we going to still be able to have a home? And so it's like they cripple you, they restrict you in a way, and fear can do that on its own. But when
sure.
it's your resources that you need to live, or if I don't have access to the medications, or if the medications too high where I can't afford them out of my pocket, and then also my insurance doesn't cover it, or I'm not just able to get it, then that affects my existence, my ability to be healthy so that
Yeah.
I can continue to fight, right?
Mhm.
But I definitely uh, echo what you're saying as well. But I think um, I hope that we can. The other part of that for me is that we will be still alive and well enough to be able to sort of enjoy, not enjoy, but to live in the imagination of what of what could be, now that we know how dependent or interdependent we are on certain things.
Yeah.
Um, but I agree. I think it will definitely make us think twice about how we organize, how we come together in all the different ways, organizationally as well as individually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on that, you know, part of what your work and what you've been doing and what you've been sort of promoting over your advocacy period. In what can people do? What can people do now? Certainly within the US, but also around the world. What can people do now towards trying to challenge these policy changes, trying to come together to speak up? What are some of the tactics that you used in the past that have worked that the wider community can adopt in order to try and change this?
You know, thank you for that question. I feel like people, it's really, I try to keep it simple. What people can do is you got to stay informed. You
Hmm.
got to stay informed. Health literacy here in the US is not the best, not surprisingly. It's really high. People need, uh, we, we are a country that spends so much money on health care, so much money on healthcare, and yet we still have so much prevalence in this country, and part of that also is that people aren't even fully aware or informed of how to navigate one living with a with the health issue, and then navigating the health system, and then we have a forces that want to take away the very health system that supports everybody, anybody, and yet they want to take that away, but yet they don't even provide an option like, oh, here's a better way to do it. You know, they're not, they just want to take away. And um, so it makes us vulnerable to all sorts of things. For example, in this case, criminalization laws. And so, not to go off track, but I just want to say that really people got to stay informed. It's so easy to be distracted by so many things in this country and in this world, even that we don't pay attention to people making decisions about our lives. And so we have to do better about that. And also, we have to come together more. I don't know about other parts of the world, but here in the US, we used to be where you would know your neighbors and have some, you know, but now it's so distant, like you don't even know your neighbor because you have to be extra cautious, and um, there's all sorts of things happening. So there's just so much that we have to do, and educating ourselves and being informed, especially now in this age of misinformation and disinformation. We have to be informed with the right information. So that is what I give to people, because it doesn't cost you anything. And it's not like you have to do some amazing thing. Just stay informed, be informed, and then do that. It will uh, guide you into what you need to do, because you'll know what you need to do intrinsically. You'll know, oh, I must do this, or I want to do that. Um, but you have to be informed to know what is going on.
I'm gonna so you know, Positive Plus One has a we have a blog that we write, and we try and bring in some of the the most relevant and insightful things that are happening. But are there any
Hmm.
resources that you would steer people to, where they can access this kind of information to stay informed?
Yeah, again, follow the HIV Justice Network in terms of the HIV criminalization. Um, I mean, some of the entities that I'm connected with here in the US is the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation. They have a global reach. Um, gosh, with what's changing now, I can't say some of the things we I could say to follow. I'm not even sure. Uh, because of just the infrastructure. But those are at least two entities that I'm involved in. The other entities are things that I'm either it's regional or specific, but definitely the HIV Justice Network, if they're particularly interested in around the criminalization work,
I will
that
say
is,
I will say that for anyone sort of listening that's in the US right now, um, you may or may not be aware, but lots of health education has now been removed from lots of official
hmm
websites, and had to be sadly be forced to be taken down. um, I have been connecting people up with resources here in the UK, because we haven't had that. So there's a People First Charter, which is
hmm
worth checking out. There's still great information coming out of UN AIDS. Um,
hmm
but look, you don't necessarily have to look just solely within the US. Maybe sort of have a look farther
right.
afield. That really helps.
Yeah,
Um,
we're finding that we have to have the associations whoever they are. Like for in this International AIDS Society would be a great one to
yeah,
follow.
exactly.
You know, because if in the U.S. if they're removing information, then it would be on the organizations, the advocacy organization, or even the associations, the professional or associations to provide us some type of guidance, right, or some type of information just to keep it going and flowing. Um, because otherwise, it's going to be at the state level here, and not all states are the same in terms of the resources, and so
Yeah,
you may or may not be without certain information, and so unless you live in a state that's going to provide those things for you, and so so we really would need to lean on some of our community advocacy organizations or or just the professional associations to continue to keep us informed.
Mhm. And one last question, sort of just around this particular topic was, and again, I don't fully understand the political system in the US, but um, we have local MPs here in the UK. Is there a case where somebody could reach out to their, I think the class them as local governors in the US. So you could reach out to the
Hmm.
person who's sort of the local governor, and then you reach out to them to contact them to say, look, we're against these policy changes. Go and speak for us in the Oval Office or whatever it might be. Is
Yeah.
that the case?
Oh yeah. Well, we still have our Congress, and so we just actually had a federal advocacy day where many of us across the country. I think it's probably the largest state representative of states in a while for what we call AIDS Watch,
Mm-hmm.
and we showed up and we have our meetings to discuss the policies and the times and because a lot of us have just been watching things play out on television, but we've not really had opportunities to be in spaces together to address our feelings as well as to okay, what's the strategy? And then after the meeting, we were able to go what we call Capitol Hill, meaning go have visits with our respective legislators from various states. And so that's happening. Currently, they're having like a biomedical HIV summit prevention summit that's happening um, this weekend. And so that's another gathering. And so hopefully we'll be able to continue to have the conferences that we've been having for forever and because that allows people to come together to learn what is happening,
Mm-hmm.
what's the current landscape, what's currently happening. So hopefully funding will not be gravely impact our abilities to gather at conferences. So that is one way. And honestly, we as community, like community knows how to come together. We've uh, been organizing for decades, and so just sharing information amongst community, whether it's through a webinar or focus groups or town halls or whatever, or even marches and protests. Those
Whatever
are
it
also
takes,
ways.
right?
Yeah,
Whatever
whatever
it
it
takes.
takes.
Whatever it takes. Listen,
Right.
we've seen, and for anyone who's not quite grasping the underlying tone of this conversation, you only have to look at how the abortion laws were revoked in the US. If you don't continue to fight for what you previously fought for, it might be pulled away from you. So
Yeah,
now is the time to speak
that
up.
was the time.
Now is the time
Hmm.
to act up, and this is really part of what I'm trying to achieve with this podcast is that is to realize that there is strength in numbers and there's your voice
Hmm.
together can be amplified on such a
Yes,
huge scale, and
absolutely.
that can be the catalyst for change. um, One thing that and this is this sort of takes me back, but you mentioned about your work with the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation, um,
Hmm.
and for the people listening, this was actually how I first came into Robert sort of came into my sphere, into within my world. So you were a part of a brilliant campaign, um,
Hmm.
which is all around sort of HIV and the narrative of HIV being stuck in the 80s. And there
Hmm.
was some brilliant, sort of marketing and assets that went out from as part of that. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And because I love that. I love that whole message.
Yeah, that is a great campaign. Being stuck in the 80s, because that's really what these laws, these HIV criminalization laws, are stuck in the 80s. And so, the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation started this campaign in 2020, and also is partly in partnership with other community advocacy organizations, and they come together, and it's called the Health Not Prisons Collective. So you have the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation and the Health Not Prisons Collective, um, sort of working in partnership to address this sort of bigger issue around HIV criminalization. So they each, have different functions, but yet partnering. And so through the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation, we were able to organize a council, which I am chair of the Council of Justice Leaders um, with the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation. And it's a council of people who've been impacted by HIV criminalization laws in various states. And so we've come together to lend our likeness and our voice and our lived experience to help with whatever the initiative is, whether it's through sort of speaking on panels or um, um, oh God, it escaped me now. We each have our own. Some of us have our own true not crime story, so that you could learn a little bit more about our experience. We also have the public service announcements, um, and there are times that we've gone to have congressional briefings where we talk about HIV criminalization from our experience with legislative staff uh, of representatives and senators here in the U.S. So there's just been various ways that, as a council, we use our voice collectively and then, of course, individually to help amplify the campaign and help with its reach. Um, we recently just completed a roundtable discussion with journalist Don Lemon, where we just come in to just have a conversation about it. And we find different ways to talk about it as well. To reach more people, to appeal to be able to appeal to more people and again bring awareness to them and inform them. So that is currently what's available out there on the internet as well as on the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation's website. Um, so that's just a few examples of ways that we've been able to highlight this issue and also to involve celebrities too, and help them be informed about it as well as their people that follow them. So it's really been a, a really good experience connecting with the various celebrities and and just bringing something where people who aren't celebrated, who aren't celebrities, like and being able to come together and around a cause, around an issue to help amplify the message. So I've enjoyed. I mean, the campaign is still ongoing. I think this is our fifth year, I believe. Um, and so it's still going, and luckily we've been able to. The foundation has been able to states that they've support coalitions where they've supported in various states have been able to make some strides, whether it's repealing a law or just having some type of change within the law. And so those, the small wins, they add up. And so that's something to be proud of. Yeah. So the funding that the foundation has provided, as well as the campaign itself, has really made a difference.
For sure. And look, for anyone sort of watching or listening, if you haven't seen it, go check out that campaign. It will make you laugh. It will entertain you. It's brilliant. And if you are still stuck in the 80s with that narrative, then it's time to get more informed, for
Yeah.
sure. Um, Robert, you're incredibly humble. I think that's really what I've taken from this conversation. You are incredibly humble. Um, you know, people, please go check Robert's work out. See where in areas where maybe you can get involved and you can help. Um,
Mhm.
I've got one last question for you.
Sure.
Um, Looking ahead, what are your future goals? What are you how do you see the future of HIV advocacy? How do you see that people can contribute towards this movement and towards ending HIV
Mhm.
criminalization?
I think the future for HIV advocacy, how I see it, I'm optimistic. I'm hoping that the funding issue um, will not stop us because it doesn't stop me. This is something that I said I would do whether I was paid for it or not, because it's my existence. And if I don't fight, if I don't address or say something, then I don't exist. And so it's nice when it's always nice when it's funding pushed behind this. But I'm optimistic because there's now the generations that we have now that are involved in HIV. They're wanting to do something. I was just speaking to someone today. They're working on interviewing people in their state around HIV criminalization and having more conversations around it. And I just met them for the first time, and I'm glad to be able to offer some support, to them, and encouragement, and realizing that the things that they are experiencing are things that I experience. So, in terms of just doing the work, so it makes my heart glad to know that, like, wow, they are feeling the things that I felt when I did what I did, whenever I did it. So I'm optimistic. I just hope that the funding doesn't stop us. I feel like it will have some effect, but hopefully, again, we will find ways to move forward without needing that. So I'm very optimistic about it. And if anything, I hope that we will gain more allies in the fight. Um, And so for me, I hope to write a memoir about my experience. I think that would be like the final thing. And then I can probably just, I don't know, relax, hopefully. So I hope to do that. And uh, and one, I just think continue to educate people, not just about HIV criminalization, but just about a lot of different things. Now, my lived experience is not just within HIV; it's all the things I addressed just in this session. So there's lots there I could talk about, from different lens, around this issue. So I hope to be able to do more with helping bring awareness to other issues, that people are dealing with. Because, as long as we breathe, and we're still going to continue to have these fights that will, have to meet at the moment. So yeah, so those are just some of the few things that I think about. Um, and just supporting new advocates, new emerging advocates, and helping them find their way, discover their voice, so that, because I've been in it for a minute and still have a little time to go with more. But you do get tired. You do. And so it's always good to have people coming up behind you and being able to pass the baton to them and give them what they need so that they can run uh, this marathon as well.
For sure.
Mhm.
Robert, you've been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This has
Yeah,
been great.
yeah. Thank you for
I
your time.
appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm doing my best to advocate as well as I can. And and I hope that we together can inspire other people to advocate and to fight for what's right. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. You've been a brilliant guest. And I hope that we can speak again in 6
Yeah.
months' time, and it's a very different conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But I appreciate this moment, because I mean I've been thinking about things, but I haven't really quite articulated them yet. So this sort of space gives me opportunity to sort of get some of that out that I've
Mhm.
been thinking, because we're still in it. So it's like, people come with the questions, and I'm just like, we don't know yet, because it haven't quite happened yet, but yet it has that potentially can happen. Whatever. They're like, what's going to happen with the laws? I'm like, well, honestly, nothing changes at the state level. These are still state laws. But if anything, I feel like it could be even more incarceration, because if they're just affecting prevention, HIV prevention funding and the infrastructure, I mean, it's people who are impacted that are going to suffer, and even more people going to be diagnosed with HIV, and they may not know it, but then there's these laws that are kind of waiting there for them, right? So
Mhm.
um, so there the questions are already being asked, but I'm like, well, we haven't quite got there yet to kind of have an analysis, but we
But
can
we will.
only, yeah.
But we will.
So
We will. We'll get there. We will. We'll get there for sure.
yes.
For sure.
So
Okay.
so
Thank you
thank
so
you
much.
for using your platform to raise awareness. So
Thank you, Robert. I
mhm.
will speak to you soon.